It is Friday, and we are working for Crusoe. Friday, December 20th, 2024. In Los Angeles, he is Sam Park. Also in Los Angeles, I am John Ramey. It is sunny. Happy holidays, everybody. Hello, Sam.
Hi, John.
We have an update on monetary policy. The Fed has been in action this week. It is riveting. We have an update regarding Syria. United States diplomats are in Damascus. And the latest in the unending constitutional crisis in South Korea. So let us begin with the Fed. Now, there was the cut yesterday, but let's start with today, Sam. CNBC reporting on this Friday, the Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index, that is the Fed's preferred inflation gauge, showed an increase of just 0.1% from October. The measure indicated a 2.4% inflation rate on an annual basis, still ahead of the Fed's 2% goal, but lower than the 2.5% estimate from Dow Jones. The monthly reading was also 0.1 point below the forecast. So excluding food and energy, core PCE, personal consumption expenditures, increased 0.1% monthly and was 2.8% higher from a year ago. Personal income rose 0.3%. Basically, good inflation news. And this comes directly after yesterday, or rather Wednesday, when the Federal Reserve lowered its key interest rate by 0.25 percentage point. This is also CNBC reporting. The third consecutive reduction, and one that came with a cautionary tone about additional cuts in coming years. Now, I will hand this to you to pilot the reporting on this, but basically, the world's most powerful deadhead, Fed Chair Powell, said, yes, we've made this cut that you were all expecting, but we might not be cutting as aggressively in 2025 as maybe previously thought, because we're not sure where inflation is going to go, especially given the, let's call it, unpredictable nature of what the incoming administration's economic policies might be.
I think that's exactly right, yes.
So, and I think I texted you a quote of his saying, it's like, and I'm paraphrasing, it's like when you're in a dark room and you don't know where the furniture is, you just slow down a little bit. And sure. I thought that is some plain speaking common sense from our unelected, all-powerful deadhead.
Yes, and apart from that, it was about the most, Powell's remarks on Wednesday were basically the most anodyne, sort of standard issue Fed commentary that you could ever imagine.
And that's a high bar.
Yes, exactly. Right.
Because they never say anything because they don't want to freak out the markets.
Exactly. And so, which didn't work apparently, but
yeah, the market dropped 1,100 points after.
Yes, which was inexplicable to me.
They're like adolescent girls. They're so sensitive.
Well, you know what I think? They're drug addicts. The idea that they might not get their cheap money next year, and they start to freak out. But it was widely expected that the Federal Reserve would cut by 0.25 point. In fact, there were more market survey participants who were thinking that they probably shouldn't cut at all. And CNBC themselves, Steve Leisman, does an informal poll of market participants ahead of every Fed meeting, that is open market committee meeting, and 93% of the participants in this poll thought that the Fed would cut interest rates, but only 63% thought that they should.
Now, is that a direct result of people being freaked out that Donald Trump might impose these wild tariffs, which would be radically inflationary?
I guess. I mean, the problem is nobody knows how big the tariffs are actually going to be, or even if they're going to happen at all.
So everybody, like Powell, is like, all right, let's just see what happens here before we go slashing our only tool, reducing our only tool to control inflation.
Exactly. But the people who know more about investment markets than I do were saying that the reason the markets freaked out, or investors freaked out so much, is because of the forward guidance, which you mentioned. That is, the Federal Reserve seemed to indicate that they would not be cutting rates as much next year as they had previously thought. They had forecast earlier this year that next year there could be as many as 4 rate cuts. And now they're only thinking that there's only going to be 2. But again, this should not have been a surprise to anybody. Inflation is stickier. Their target is 2%, and it's, seems to be kind of stuck, just above 2.5%. If they're not at target, then that means inflationary pressures are going to persist. And all of the stated policies of the president-elect are inflationary to some degree or another. And we don't know to what extent those policies are going to be enacted. So the impact on inflation of Donald Trump's policies is something that we cannot yet foresee, and we're not going to find out until he starts to roll them out. And so the idea that inflation is stickier and perhaps going to be more persistent next year than we might have thought earlier this year should not come as a surprise. But, what I think part of it is just that there are many more people and more kinds of people involved in investment markets today than there ever have been. So, I think more professional participants in the markets can see all this coming, but it's everybody else who's participating now and didn't used to that might be surprised by this sort of thing.
Ah, so in that sense, investment markets are no different to media or something these days, right? There are a lot more people who are not kind of traditionally trained or
yes, it's
right
disaggregated.
Yeah,
Right?
it's it's democratized, Sam.
Or okay, fine. Whatever. You say potato.
Sure. Oh, so that's an interesting point. So if the exact same announcement and the exact same economic data had come down in 1987, the investor reaction you think would have been more muted?
I think so, yes, but it's difficult to say. I mean, things are so different now. But
Sure.
I mean, this is again an entirely commonplace set of remarks from the Fed. So we shouldn't spend a whole lot more time talking about this. But there's one more thing I would like to add.
Please.
That I found out today that Starbucks, the coffee shop chain, is involved in a labor dispute. I think I knew that already. But they have offered their employees, but this is what I found out today, a 2% pay increase immediately, followed by annual pay increases of 1%. Now, as we've mentioned, 2% is less than the rate of inflation today. And in fact, it is the Fed target rate, which they don't seem to think they're going to achieve before at least a year from now. And 1% is considerably less than that. In fact, it's only half of 2%, as a quick math will let us know. And no, of course, nobody who works for Starbucks wants to work there forever, right? It's not a career track profession. But it seems a bit much if the company you work for is telling you straight out, we don't want you to be able to earn a living here, right? Please try to find a new job as quickly as possible.
I mean, that is wild.
Yeah, and it's just like, well, how could you just step forward and say, or we think you're too stupid to figure this out? And so it's just baffling to me how people do these things. But that's just a sort of ancillary story to our main story about inflation and monetary policy.
Well, Sam, they could also just work in journalism and never have a recurring pay increase.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Shall we move to Syria?
Please.
Okay. Reporting, there are two stories that caught my attention. I mean, Syria is its own galaxy of interesting stories. So there are two stories kind of timely this week that caught my attention. So this is from the New York Times. From today, senior American diplomats traveled through Damascus, the Syrian capital, on Friday today to meet with militias controlling the country and with civil society groups and to look for signs of the journalist Austin Tice and other missing U.S. citizens, the State Department said. They are the first American diplomats to enter Damascus since the crumbling of the old government, and they aim to help shape the political landscape of Syria after the rapid fall this month of Bashar al-Assad, the longtime autocratic leader. The U.S. broke off diplomatic ties with Syria in 2012. So we have not had ties with Syria diplomatically officially for almost 13 years. The year after Assad ordered his forces to carry out mass atrocities during the country's civil war. All right, so there's that. And then this reporting from NBC from yesterday. In a surprise announcement, the Defense Department disclosed Thursday that U.S. officials have doubled the number of American troops in Syria to support the fight against ISIS, an increase that predates the fall of the Assad regime this month. The Pentagon press secretary, Major General Pat Ryder, said at the Pentagon briefing, this is in front of reporters yesterday, that the U.S. has roughly 2,000 troops deployed in Syria, even though the U.S. military and U.S. Central Command have consistently reported having only 900 troops there. Ryder did not say when the number of U.S. personnel had increased. He said he had learned Thursday that the number has been significantly higher for some time. Basically, he said, look, there's a lot of attention on Syria right now, and we just think you guys should know that we have double the troops that we've been saying we have. And when pressed, he was like, look, I can't comment as to why there was a discrepancy and blah, blah, blah. It's just been this way for some time, and we just want to make sure that that information is accurate. The great quote I enjoy was, it's been going on for a while.
That's terrific. Well, the thing is, somebody was going to find out.
Right. Because obviously all eyes are on Syria right now. The world's eyes are on Syria. Those are two rather American-centric stories regarding Syria.
Sure, but the first one is actually, I mean, there's diplomats from all over the place streaming through Damascus right now. There's people from the UN.
I bet it's a wild time.
Yeah. Yair Pedersen, this UN special envoy for Syria, was there, I think, on Monday, Rita, but you can imagine that he'd want to get there ahead of a lot of other people. But people from the European Union and various individual European countries as well have been going in there, as well you might expect. And I expect, in fact, that European nations and the European Union more broadly will sort of be taking the lead on Western engagement with whatever government takes shape in Syria, partly just because they're the closest. They have the largest numbers of refugees that have come from Syria in the past 12 years. There's a lot to play for there. And everybody has a direct interest in this all turning out well. The thing that I found most remarkable this week was that the leader of what I guess might formerly be the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham (HTS), the rebel group that is now in de facto control of Syria.
We call them the winners, Sam.
Yes, that Ahmed al-Sharaf, formerly Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, gave a substantially long interview with the BBC under the auspices of the BBC's international editor, the veteran Jeremy Bowen. And they did it inside the presidential palace. But now, of course, I've never met al-Shara, and I don't give him advice. But if I had, I would have said, hey, buddy, ditch the fatigues and wear some nice clothes. He did this, right? He did the interview in slacks, powder blue dress shirt, gray tweed jacket. Mehdi looking sharp, okay? And
kinder, gentler jihadist.
Yeah.
Former jihadist.
And he didn't wear a tie, which is unfortunate. I thought he should. I mean, if you've gone this far, you might as well go for the 2-point conversion.
It's hip. It's almost 2025.
Anyway, and so Bowen asked him, look, a lot of people think that you're going to, I'm paraphrasing here, obviously, but a lot of people feel like they are scared that you'll end up being like the Taliban in Afghanistan. And now, of course, we already know that al-Shiraz is bending over backwards to make sure that people don't think he's going to do that. So he didn't just say, no, we're not going to. He said, listen, Afghanistan has always been a tribal society. Syria never has been.
No, cosmopolitan, quite.
That's right. And so there's no way we could possibly govern it that way, which I thought was a very astute reply, frankly. And we can, on our end, just you and I, John, can expand on this a little bit. Damascus, as we know, is, I believe, the oldest continuously inhabited city on earth, or at least among them. 5,000 years people have been living in Damascus. And during that time, they've been, as you say, a thriving cosmopolitan capital in the Roman
crossroads
Empire,
of the world.
Yeah, in the Roman Empire, in the Byzantine Empire, in the Ottoman Empire. Right? And on and on and on. This is always how they've lived. It's not at all like Afghanistan.
No, it's not mountain bound. You're right.
Yeah,
you're on the shore of the Mediterranean.
Beyond somewhere, right? I mean, and in fact, it's only comparatively recently that Syria has been disconnected from the broader international community. And so I thought this was, again, very astute reply. on behalf of al-Sharaa. And he said uh, that he wanted there to be a constitutional council, that is, a council of legal experts to develop a new inclusive constitution for Syria. He also pointed out that the majority of university students in Syria are women, and that he saw no reason why that should not continue. Uh, and now I have also seen his apparently interim education minister say, well, we're still going to segregate secondary school students by gender. So, uh, some of this, some of that, apparently. And I should add also that uh, you don't need to be as tribal a society as Afghanistan in order to be riven by horrifying sectarian violence. Just ask
Sure.
Lebanon, right next door to Syria, which
Right.
is in fact probably the Arab nation that most resembles Syria
Sure.
demographically and geographically. So I'm not saying, look, everything's going to be fine, right? I just want to sort of mark the progress of al-Sharaa in his attempted negotiations with the broader world. And just in general, I would also say that he knows everybody's watching him. Okay, I mean, and will be for some time to come. And as we mentioned last week, he's surrounded by U.S. allies, right? Every country with which he shares a border is on one level an ally of the U.S. There's no place for him to go here. Having said that, though, a lot of people in Syria don't seem inclined to take his word for it.
Hmm.
There were demonstrations yesterday, peaceful, of hundreds of people in Damascus demanding civilian government and rights for women. And so, they were not put down. The demonstrations went ahead. And so, obviously, this is a story to which we're going to have to return in many future episodes. But it's fascinating. It
It is
really.
yeah. I,
But the other main thing I would say about al-Sharaa, though, is that he's very young. He's
okay,
in his.
that I want to focus a little bit on his biography. So carry on.
No, no, you go right ahead. Like
But
that
how
is
old
where
is he?
he's about 42, I think.
Okay, young man.
Uh, yeah, and he's in fact, Jeremy Bowen pointed out in his introduction to his interview with al-Sharaa that he was formerly a Sunni resistance fighter in Iraq against the United States, but going back 20 years or almost 20 years at least, right? And so now, John, I don't know about you, but when I was 42, uh, my outlook on life was considerably different from what it had been 20 years earlier. Not radically different, but I'd learned a few things in 20 years. And
Can confirm.
yeah,
Yeah,
and I have
yeah.
to, I would think that this is just what happens to people, right? So the idea that this guy should be exactly the same as he was 20 years ago, he could be, right? But he's seen a lot of things happen in those 20 years. It's not like he's just been sitting around and has had no reason to adjust his viewpoint. Again, we're going to have to see how this plays out.
It is funny how it is not consistent, but it is noteworthy in history when, and we can't say this about al-Sharaa, but let's just say that the current trends hold. He might be a remarkable figure thrust into this moment, just based on our discussions of how savvy he is about.
Yeah.
I don't want to say branding because that's not exactly right, but it's in that direction, right?
I mean, I wouldn't actually necessarily shy away from using that term.
Okay.
And that's the other thing I would, if you look around in any of the TV footage of what's going on in Syria, and this happens in every developing country that where we see television reporting from, everybody has a smartphone. Right. I mean, the Syrian economy is shattered, decimated, stuff like this, but somehow everybody's got a smartphone. And this happens in every poor country. So everybody knows that everybody is watching everybody else to an even greater extent than was true even 12 years ago when the
Sure.
Arab Spring took off.
Of course.
And I think this makes a difference. And I think it particularly makes a difference in the case of somebody as young as al-Sharaa.
Well, he's a
Right?
millennial if he's 42.
That's right.
So his
And
adulthood has been absolutely transformed and informed by the smartphone.
That's right, and he's not the leader of some ancient legacy organization like the Muslim Brotherhood,
Right.
for example, right? He might have some affiliations with them and even some ideological affinities. But the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt had been around for decades, right? They had an institutional structure and things like this. This guy's been running Idlib for a few years. And the other thing I would say about that is that he's been working hand in glove all that time governing Idlib with Turkey. And Turkey is a trading nation, right? And it's an Islamist nation to some degree, right? Back in about 20 years ago, when Erdogan first took power, Recep Tayyip Erdogan first took power in Turkey, the Economist used to refer to him as mildly Islamist, which I always thought was hilarious, like he had the flu or something,
Right.
right? Then this was before we understood that he was an autocrat. But there's a model there, right? Turkey has been not
They're
just,
modern.
yeah, that's right. It's a modern nation, right? They've not just been providing military aid to HTS, but the economy across the border with Turkey is how people in Idlib have been getting by in a rather higher standard than most people in Syria. So again, al-Sharaa has some incentive to understand that international trade is the way to go, that he wants to get play. And that, in fact, he's been asking Western nations to lift sanctions against Syria. And that I expect will sort of slowly happen over time. I don't think they're going to lift all the sanctions all at once, obviously.
All right. Al-Sharaa, one-time Sunni militia fighter against the U.S. in Iraq,
Yes.
is now an apparently super media savvy Civil War winner and leader of Syria for the moment.
Unexpectedly.
Yeah, I'm just like, did he go to Oxford? Like, how much do we know about his biography? Or has history just happened upon somebody who fought the Americans and worked with the Turks and won the war and is maybe surprising to us, but perhaps not to those living in Idlib or those fighting on his side, an incredibly gifted, charismatic leader. And maybe
I think it's the latter.
I mean, I was also thinking about this, right? Because I only orient history in terms of sports, right? Like every 4 years we have an Olympics. Every year we have a, whatever champion, whatever sport, right? The collapse, the fall, the violent takeover of governments, that doesn't happen on a regular basis. The profound.
No, and it actually has nothing to do with sports, John.
Well, that's my point. That's my point, right? It's much rarer a landmark in time.
Yes. There's
and so you just don't always get to draw the card of a gentleman like al-Sharaa or whomever, right? Like often it's just another bozo.
Yes, and
you get fewer shots on goal, Sam.
Oh, there's
hey, you said 2-point conversion earlier.
I did. I know. I'm sorry to step on your toes. There's an old story that they tell about Napoleon, which may or may not be true. But someone was said to have asked Napoleon Bonaparte, "What do you think is the most important characteristic that a general can have?" And according to the story, Napoleon's reply was, "He should be lucky."
That's
yeah. And I think that's just really what's happened to al-Sharaa in this case. But he's playing a good hand.
He seems to understand it
well.
Yeah.
Right. And so then that's, I think, the important part. It's fascinating to me. But we'll find out more about him as this story plays out over time.
Again, it's just such a rare event, right? You just don't have governments fall all the time, and then you certainly don't get somebody necessarily this interesting.
Yes, and especially that government was in power for a very long time, and nobody expected it was fun. It was terrible. I mean, if you've seen all the footage from the prisons and things, it's just ghastly.
Also, one other thing about al-Sharaa that I think is so savvy, and then we can move on, is that he seems to understand that if he gets this part right, messaging wise, he can actually be a terrible autocrat tyrant down the road, because this first impression will have an outsized impact on how the world views him. Maybe not. If I want to be cynical, I would say Putin kind of did the same thing.
Well, not only that, but I've seen countless interviews with ordinary Syrians who say nothing could be worse. All right. So
Right.
if you hear that, it's like, okay, I could be pretty bad, right? And people
So
will
there's a
still
broad range of opinions
They'll
about this
still
gentleman.
people, people will still consider me an improvement almost no matter what I do. Right
Right.
now, I think that would be a bad message to take away from this, but you could certainly understand how anyone would take that message away.
Uh, how about we go to South Korea?
Please, I think this is actually my favorite story of the week.
Okay. So when we were taping last week, President Yoon Suk Yeol was being impeached, or voting was taking place for the second time on his impeachment. Last Saturday, he was impeached. Dateline Seoul Associated Press. South Korea's acting leader on Thursday, yesterday, which is Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, vetoed a spate of contentious bills sponsored by the main opposition party, deepening political strife in the wake of Parliament's impeachment of Yoon. Okay, so this Prime Minister, Han Duck-soo, and Sam, help me with this, but we will call Prime Minister Han Duck-soo Prime Minister Han, just
Yes,
like we would call the President Yoon. The
that's
surname
right.
is first one. Okay. So Han is the number two official, and he assumes more authority since the impeachment of Yoon. They're from the same party,
Yes.
right? Because ostensibly that's the ruling party. That's why they have the presidency. It's why they have the prime minister ship,
Yes,
whatever.
and in fact,
The premiership.
Yoon
Yeah,
is still the president.
right. Uh, so the National Assembly voted to impeach Yoon 204 to 85. Yoon's presidential powers and duties were subsequently suspended. And then Han took over presidential powers this past Saturday after that impeachment vote. So the first impeachment vote of Yoon, what it didn't it
Failed.
it failed straight up. It
Well,
wasn't
they didn't have a quorum. They
right.
actually
That's right.
officially did not
Yeah.
have a vote. Yeah.
So the second one, he's impeached, and now Han is in charge. He's in Yoon's party, and he's vetoing bills, and the opposition is furious.
Yes. This is going to be a mess for some time to come.
Yeah.
For example, and just to sort of fill in our American listeners, that is all of our listeners, pretty much, on the differences between our system and the South Korean system. The South Korean legislature has only one chamber, the National Assembly. And so, as far as impeachment goes, their role is similar to the role of our House of Representatives. They're, in effect, a 300-member grand jury, essentially delivering the indictment. The impeachment trial, which here in the United States would take place in the Senate, is going to take place in the Supreme Court, perhaps it's called the Constitutional Court in South
Sure.
Korea. But
The
they're
highest court.
yes, they're the ones who will actually decide whether or not Yoon is removed from office. This could take a couple of months. For instance, there are vacancies on that court right now. It's unclear whether they have enough sitting justices for a quorum. Now, I'm confident that they will work that out. But again, this is going to take a while. And uh, uh, it's just sort of messy going forward. Meanwhile, every leader in the world is trying to get close to Donald Trump as his presidency is gearing up to begin. And South Korea has many important issues facing it in relation to the United States. The tariffs could
Yeah, they're a
very
big trading partner.
yeah, I mean, the tariffs could very dramatically impact South Korea. Microchips, right? Samsung is an enormous producer of microchips. How's that going to play out? And of course, uh, relations with North Korea, right? And there's nobody in charge in South Korea that has the standing to actually involve themselves in these negotiations with the incoming Trump administration, and when they would really like to be able to do so. And so this is just terrible for the country of South Korea. And it speaks, I think, to what could Yoon have been thinking. But on that score, there's an aspect of this story that I didn't see any reporting on until last weekend, a full week and a half after the initial declaration of martial law. But both the Washington Post and The Economist had different correspondents point out that last year, that is 2023, the top grossing film in South Korea was a Netflix production, the title of which has been variously translated into English as either Soul Spring, Soul's Spring, or 1212 the Day. And it's a dramatization of the last declaration of martial law in South Korea in 1979, which took place in circumstances much more tumultuous than the ones facing South Korea today, including the assassination of President Park Chung-hee, no relation, who and the declaration of martial law that followed that assassination, and in fact helped galvanize the pro-democracy protests that eventually, a number of years later, led to the end of military rule in South Korea. This was an enormously popular film. Young South Koreans came out of it saying, "Gosh, I didn't know it was that bad. That's crazy," right? I mean, I have no idea if this actually happened, but it sort of feels like Yoon Suk Yeol saw the film and said something to
That's a good
himself
idea.
like, "Boy, those were the good old days. That's what I should do."
Make South Korea great again.
It's just crazy, right?
Now
And
he's old, right? And some people have wondered if he had an episode that
yeah,
precipitated this.
people have kind of been dancing around this for reasons that we'll get to shortly. But last week in our episode, we talked about the defiant, combative speech that Yoon gave after his first contrite apologetic speech, right? He had given it the day before we taped last week's episode on December 12th, the
Oh,
45th anniversary of the last declaration of martial law. So I don't think this characterization is all that off base. It really seems like he wanted to somehow reenact this last martial law declaration. It's totally bonkers.
okay. Have you seen this on Netflix?
I have not seen it.
I haven't either. You have just given me a wonderful movie recommendation, so that's
And
good.
we're going to have to see again how all this works out. But to go back to the idea of mental illness,
Yeah.
one of
Something
another
about we would know nothing about a diminished executive in this country.
no, and perish the thought.
Yeah.
But another thing about Yoon Suk Yeol is that he seems to have governed South Korea as president, surrounded by a coterie of cronies, which many presidents do. There's nothing especially wrong with that. But they're people that he went to high school with, including his defense minister, whose name escapes me. I'm sorry to say, but the defense minister was the first person to resign in sort of the fall guy for the martial law declaration. He was arrested and attempted to commit suicide in detention.
Christ.
Now, and this is, I think, one of the reasons why people have been skittish about assigning mental illness to President Yoon, because in fact, South Korea consistently leads, if not tops, the league tables in suicide, including one former president who was brought up on corruption charges after leaving office, a president of the chairman of the Hyundai Corporation earlier than that, who again was also corrupt. And John, you might recall about 10 years ago, I think, an enormous ferry boat disaster in South Korea, where the boat sank and killed about 300 people, about 200 of whom were middle school to high school
Yeah.
students. And the vice principal, they were on a school trip. The vice principal, who was leading the trip, later hanged himself. And this is just sort of, I don't want to say accepted, but
It's a cultural sensitivity.
yes, it's a not uncommon phenomenon in South Korea that people in the positions of authority decide that there's no other recourse for them
And
than
that's why they're being sensitive around message or
I think so.
discussing
Yeah,
this
I mean
topic.
they're not saying why they're not saying why they're not saying what they're
Right.
not saying.
Right.
But I think that this has to enter into it somehow. But in fact, that ferry boat disaster occasioned a government after action report that sought to explain how this had happened, ease the public mind. And that report uh, was widely believed to be a whitewash, right? That is to sort of downplay the severity and culpability surrounding the sinking of the boat. And people were very angry about this. And that was one of the factors that led to the impeachment of the last president of President Yoon's party, Park Geun-hye. Again, no relation to me, but she was a relation to the assassinated president in 1979. She was, in fact, the daughter of uh, Park Chung-hee, the former military dictator of South Korea. So all these issues are still, partly because of the film, are still very live in the public mind in South Korea. People know about these things because they never end. So again, the idea that Yoon thought he might be able to get away with it is just outlandish to me. I can't understand it.
All right. We will keep our eye on South Korea. We are going to skip next week. We are going to skip next Friday, and then we'll be back on the first Friday of 2025 with a hybrid year in review, year looking ahead episode. So everybody, have a Merry Christmas. Enjoy your holiday. And we'll take next Friday off, and then we'll be back in the new year.
Happy holidays, everybody.
He's Sam. I'm John. So long.